I've always believed the night has a different memory than the day. During daylight, rooms feel honest, corners are empty, hallways end where they should. But at night, things shift quietly, like the world inhales and forgets to breathe out again. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was staying alone in a small house at the edge of a pine forest, miles away from the nearest town. The electricity hummed softly through the walls, and outside, fog rested low against the trees, like something waiting to move. It was past midnight when I woke up. No sound, no nightmare, just the feeling that someone else had entered the room without opening the door. The clock glowed pale blue. 12:17 a.m. I lay still listening. The house creaked the way old houses do. Slow, tired sounds settling into darkness. My breathing felt louder than it should have been. I told myself it was nothing, just night thoughts, just imagination stretching shadows into shapes. Then I noticed the corner near the closet. The darkness there looked thicker, not darker, present, like a silhouette standing perfectly still, watching me realize it was watching back. I blinked. It didn't move. And in that silent moment, before fear reached me, I understood something I wish I never had. Some shadows don't belong to light. That's when I saw it lean closer. I grew up in a small house at the edge of town, where the streetlights stopped working years before anyone thought to fix them. At night, the darkness felt deeper there, thicker. My bedroom faced the backyard, a stretch of quiet grass and leaning trees that moved even when the air felt still. Moonlight slipped through the curtains every night, pale and cold, painting silver lines across my floor. I was 8 when it started. Every night, without fail, I woke at the same time, 3:03 a.m. I didn't know how I knew the time before opening my eyes. My body simply understood it was happening again. The house would be silent, no cars passing, no television murmuring from the living room. Even the refrigerator hummed downstairs seemed to pause. Just stillness, and my breathing, slow at first, then heavier as awareness returned. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, afraid to turn my head, because something inside me already knew I wasn't alone. The first night, I convinced myself it was a dream. I rolled onto my side and saw it, a tall shape, standing beside my bed. Not solid, not transparent either, just darker than the dark around it. Like someone cut a piece of night and placed it there. It had no face, no edges, only height. It reached almost to the ceiling. I remember thinking it must be my coat hanging from the door, but the door was across the room. The shape didn't move. It simply stood there, watching. My chest tightened. The blankets felt too heavy against my legs. The air smelled faintly cold, like rain drifting through an open window that wasn't open. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, it was still there. I pulled the blanket over my head and counted slowly, whispering numbers into the warm fabric. 1, 2, 3. The silence pressed closer. Finally, I gathered enough courage to reach toward the lamp beside my bed. My fingers trembled against the switch. Click. Light flooded the room. The shape vanished instantly. Nothing stood there. Just my dresser, my toys, the quiet wall. I told my parents the next morning. They smiled gently and blamed nightmares. Too much imagination. Growing pains. I wanted to believe them. But the next night, I woke again. 3:03 a.m. The moonlight hadn't moved, and the shape was back, standing in the exact same place. It never made footsteps, never shifted its weight, never breathed loudly, but I could feel breathing that wasn't mine. Soft, slow, close enough to stir the hair near my forehead. Night after night, it returned, always silent, always waiting. Sometimes I pretended to stay asleep, keeping my breathing steady, hoping it would leave if I didn't acknowledge it. Those nights felt longer, because I sensed it leaning closer, studying me. The air would grow colder, the darkness heavier. Once, I heard the faint rustling of my bed sheets, though I hadn't moved. Another time, my pillow dipped slightly, as if someone rested a hand beside my head. I never saw arms, never saw eyes, only the shape and the feeling of being examined. Days became exhausting. I dreaded sunset. I memorized the glow of my clock, terrified of the numbers changing. 3:01, 3:02, then 3:03. Awake every time. I stopped turning off my bedside lamp before sleeping. Light felt safe. But even then, sometimes I would wake to darkness. The bulb still warm, yet switched off, and the shape waiting patiently beside me. One night felt different. The air was heavier than usual, carrying a faint smell of dust and something older, like unopened rooms. I woke already afraid. 3:03 a.m. The shape stood closer than ever before. So close I could no longer see the floor between us. My throat tightened. I didn't reach for the lamp. I couldn't move. The room felt smaller, quieter, as if the walls were listening. Then, slowly and possibly, the shadow bent forward. Not walking, not stepping, just folding toward me. Its upper half leaned down until it hovered over my bed. I felt cold breath brush my face. My heart pounded so hard the mattress trembled beneath me. For the first time, I sensed intention. Not anger, not kindness, recognition. Like it finally knew I could see it. I forced my hand toward the lamp, fingers numb and shaking. Click! Light exploded across the room. The shape disappeared. But the blankets near my chest still moved slightly, settling, as though someone had just pulled away. I didn't sleep again that night, or many nights after. Eventually, the visit stopped. No explanation. No final moment. Just silence returning to 3:03 a.m. Years passed. New houses. New rooms. New lives. But sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I still hesitate before opening my eyes. Because I remember the feeling perfectly. That quiet breath. That waiting presence. And the certainty that the shape beside my bed never truly left. It only learned patience. I moved into the apartment during late autumn, when evenings arrived too early, and the air carried the faint smell of rain-soaked concrete. The building was old but quiet. 3 floors, long carpeted hallways, lights that flickered just enough to make shadows stretch farther than they should. My unit sat near the end of the 3rd-floor corridor. At night, the hallway felt endless. The first evening, I noticed nothing unusual. Neighbors passed politely. Doors opened and closed. Elevator chimed softly every few minutes. But after midnight, everything changed. The building settled into silence, so complete it felt padded, like sound itself had been absorbed into the walls. That was when I first noticed the hallway looked longer. I stepped outside around 1 a.m. to throw away trash. The air felt cold against my arms. The overhead lights hummed faintly, buzzing in uneven pulses. I looked toward the elevator. It seemed farther away than earlier, not dramatically, just enough to make me pause. I blamed tired eyes, returned inside, forgot about it, until the next night. Again, I stepped into the hallway. Again, it felt stretched. The carpet pattern repeated too many times before reaching the elevator doors. The ceiling lights formed a longer line than I remembered, and near the elevator, someone stood there, a tall figure, still, facing my direction. I assumed it was a neighbor waiting for the lift, but something felt wrong. They didn't shift weight, didn't check a phone, didn't press the button again, just stood perfectly upright. I gave a small nod and walked halfway down the corridor. The lights flickered once. When brightness returned, the figure was gone. The elevator never opened. I told myself they must have stepped inside quickly. Still, I never heard doors slide. After that night, I started noticing patterns. The hallway grew longer only after midnight. During the day, everything looked normal, measured, familiar, but at night, distance felt unreliable. My footsteps took longer to reach the elevator. The hum of lights echoed farther than sound should travel. And almost every night, the figure waited near the elevator, always in shadow, always motionless, never approaching. I began asking neighbors casually, "Do you know who lives near the elevator?" Most shrugged. One elderly woman frowned. "No one tall lives on this floor," she said softly. "Just families." Her answer stayed with me, because the shape I saw was unusually tall, nearly touching the ceiling lights. Another night, curiosity pushed me closer. The hallway felt colder than usual, carrying a faint metallic smell. The figure stood there again. I walked slowly toward it. Step by step, My shoes pressed quietly into the carpet. The lights flickered overhead. For a moment, I thought I saw shoulders, a head tilted slightly forward, but no features, only darkness shaped like a person. My chest tightened. Halfway there, the elevator dinged. Doors opened behind the figure. Bright interior light spilled outward. And suddenly, nothing stood there, just empty air. The doors closed again. I stopped walking. The hallway felt impossibly long behind me. After that, sleep became difficult. I avoided leaving the apartment at night. But one evening, curiosity turned into unease strong enough that I checked the building security office. I asked if I could review hallway footage. The manager agreed, amused by my concern. We rewound recordings from several nights. The camera showed the third-floor corridor clearly. There I was, stepping outside at 1 a.m., pausing, looking toward the elevator, standing still as if staring at someone. But the hallway was empty, completely empty. No figure, no shadow, just me reacting to nothing. The manager laughed kindly, said maybe I needed better sleep. I nodded, pretending to agree, but my stomach felt hollow, because in the footage, something else disturbed me. Each night, before I stepped into the hallway, the camera showed the corridor already stretched farther than it should be. The elevator appeared distant, unnaturally far away. I stopped watching, returned to my apartment, locked the door. That night, I didn't plan to leave my room. Yet sometime after midnight, I woke with a strong feeling someone waited outside. The clock read 3:03 a.m. The hallway light seeped faintly beneath my door. I listened. No footsteps, no voices, only the electrical hum running through the building. I stood slowly and opened the door. The hallway stretched endlessly, far longer than ever before, lights fading into dim points in the distance. And near the elevator, the figure stood again, closer this time, not at the end, halfway down, facing me. I froze. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. The figure didn't walk, didn't move normally, yet somehow it was nearer than before, like distance itself had shortened around it. The lights flickered. Darkness swallowed the hallway for one breath. When illumination returned, the figure stood one step closer. I shut the door immediately, locked it, pressed my back against the wood. My heartbeat echoed loudly in my ears. I never checked again that night, or the nights after. Eventually I moved out. New building, new city, normal hallways, normal distances. But sometimes when I walk down long corridors late at night, I feel it again, that quiet awareness, that patient waiting. And I wonder if the hallway never truly grew longer. Maybe something was simply learning how to come closer. The highway rest stop sat miles from anything recognizable. Just vending machines glowing under harsh white light, and rows of empty parking spaces surrounded by darkness. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I pulled in. I had been driving for hours, fighting sleep, watching endless road lines disappear beneath my headlights. The night air felt cool when I stepped out of the car. Still, silent, no insects, no passing vehicles. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place. I stretched beside the car, listening to the faint ticking of the engine cooling. The sky above was wide and empty. After a few minutes, I walked toward the restroom building. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Inside, everything smelled faintly of soap and damp concrete. No one else was there. I washed my face, trying to wake myself fully. For a moment, the mirror reflected only exhaustion. Then the lights flickered once. I turned quickly. The room remained empty. When I stepped back outside, the parking lot felt darker than before. My car sat alone under a single lamp. Something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain why. The driver's side looked normal, but the passenger side seemed occupied. I laughed quietly at myself. Too tired. Too much road. Still, as I walked closer, unease settled heavily in my chest. The passenger window reflected pale light, and for a second, I thought I saw movement inside. I stopped walking. The car remained still. No doors open. No shadows leaving. Just silence. I unlocked the car. The headlights blinked once. Nothing moved inside. I opened the driver's door slowly. Cold air drifted from the interior, colder than outside. I sat down and closed the door. The cabin smelled faintly unfamiliar. Not bad, just different, like fabric left overnight in winter air. I reached for the ignition. Before turning the key, my eyes drifted toward the passenger seat. The cushion slowly pressed downward, as if someone invisible had just sat down. I froze. The indentation deepened gradually. Leather creaked softly beside me. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head carefully. The seatbelt hung untouched. No body, no shape, only the unmistakable weight of something present. The air felt tight, hard to breathe. I stared forward, afraid to look directly again. The rear view mirror trembled slightly. In its reflection, something shifted behind me, a darker movement across the back seat. I turned quickly. Nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, movement again. Gone the moment I focused. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine clicked. Failed. I tried again. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered weakly. Beside me, the seat remained pressed down. I could feel attention directed toward me. Not hostile, not friendly, just aware. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt stretched thin. I avoided looking sideways. The silence inside the car grew louder than any noise. I became aware of breathing. Slow, measured, not matching mine. The windows began fogging lightly despite the cold. A faint outline appeared on the passenger glass, as if unseen breath touched it. I whispered without meaning to. "Hello." The word vanished immediately into stillness. No response, only presence. I tried the ignition again. The engine refused. Outside, darkness pressed close against the car windows, hiding everything beyond the weak parking light. I stayed perfectly still. Eventually, exhaustion replaced fear. My heartbeat slowed. The presence remained. Waiting. Hours seemed to pass. Then slowly, faint gray light appeared along the horizon. Dawn approaching. The moment sunlight touched the parking lot, the pressure beside me lifted. The seat rose gently back into place. The cold air faded. The car felt empty again. I turned the key. The engine started instantly. I drove away without looking back. Since that night, I avoid stopping on empty highways after midnight. But sometimes, during long drives, I glance at the passenger seat, and for a brief second, I swear I see the cushion dip slightly, as if someone still rides quietly beside me. The farmhouse belonged to my grandparents before it belonged to me. It sat alone between wide fog-covered fields, far from neighboring houses, surrounded by tall grass that whispered constantly in the wind. At night, the land disappeared. Only darkness remained beyond the windows. I moved there for quiet, for space, for sleep. The first evening felt peaceful. Would floors creak gently. Old walls breathed with the temperature drop. The scent of dust and pine filled every room. My bedroom was upstairs. One window faced the open fields. Moonlight poured through it each night, pale and steady. The first time I noticed a figure, I thought it was a tree, a tall shape standing beyond the glass. Perfectly still. I didn't question it until the next night, and the next. Each evening around midnight, the silhouette appeared again, standing directly outside the second-floor window. Impossible. There was no balcony, no ledge, nothing to stand on, only empty air and 15 feet of open drop. Yet the figure remained level with my window, unmoving, watching. I tested reality carefully. Opened the window. Cold fog drifted inside. The field stretched empty under moonlight. No ladder, no footprints, nothing. But when I closed the window and turned back, the silhouette had returned, exactly where it had been before, a darkness deeper than the surrounding night. I began closing the curtains earlier, but sometimes I felt it there even without looking, a pressure near the glass, a quiet awareness. The curtains would sway slightly despite the window being locked. Soft movements, like breath-brushing fabric. Sleep became shallow. Every creak of the house pulled me awake, and always, eventually, I felt compelled to look. The figure never waved, Never knocked, never moved closer, only waited. One evening, fog covered the field so completely that the world beyond the window vanished. White emptiness pressed against the glass. I thought perhaps the figure wouldn't appear. I was wrong. Its shape formed slowly within the fog, darker than the mist, gradually becoming visible. Too tall, too still. I turned on the bedside lamp. The light reflected off the window, and that was when something changed. The silhouette didn't stand outside anymore. It appeared inside the reflection. Behind me, I froze. In the glass, I saw my own reflection sitting on the bed, and beside me, a tall shadow leaning slightly forward. But when I turned around, the room was empty. My heart pounded. I looked back at the window. Only my reflection remained. The fields outside were empty again. After that night, I stopped looking directly at the glass. But reflections became difficult to trust. Sometimes I saw a movement that vanished when I turned. Sometimes I felt watched even in rooms without windows. Eventually, I moved away, left the farmhouse behind. Yet even now, when I sit near windows at night, I avoid checking reflections too quickly, because part of me fears what I might see waiting there. Not outside, but already inside the room. The television came with the apartment, an old box set resting in the corner of the living room, heavier than it looked, humming softly even when turned off. I rarely watched it, but one night, unable to sleep, I pressed the power button just after midnight. The screen flickered alive. Static filled the display. Gray noise moving endlessly across the glass. No channels worked anymore, only static. I lowered the volume. The room filled with faint electrical whispering, a steady hiss that somehow felt comforting. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. I sat on the couch, half asleep, watching nothing. That was when I noticed shapes inside the static. At first, they looked accidental, dark patches forming briefly before dissolving again. But the longer I stared, the clearer they became. Human silhouettes, standing figures appearing frame by frame, not moving naturally, more like photographs flashing too quickly to understand. I leaned forward. The figures seemed tall, featureless, facing outward. Toward me, the static shifted rhythm. The whispering noise changed subtly, almost patterned, almost like breathing. I turned the volume lower. The whisper remained, soft syllables hidden beneath the electrical hum. I couldn't understand words, only cadence. The television felt attentive. I switched channels. Nothing changed. Static remained. The silhouettes appeared more frequently now, one after another, standing close together, watching. Unease settled slowly into my chest. I pressed the power button. The screen went black, but the whispering didn't stop. It continued behind me. Quiet, rhythmic, close. I turned around. The room was empty. Only darkness and faint streetlight glowed through the curtains. The whisper grew clearer, matching the pace of breath behind my shoulder. I turned back toward the television. The black screen reflected the room faintly, and in that reflection, a tall shadow stood directly behind me. I spun around instantly. Nothing there. Silence returned. When I faced the screen again, the reflection showed only me. The whisper faded slowly, like a signal drifting out of range. I unplugged the television that night. Still, sometimes after midnight, I swear I hear faint static humming from the corner. And when the room goes completely dark, I avoid looking at blank screens, because I'm never sure if something is waiting inside them, watching for the moment the picture disappears. The gas station sat at the edge of town where streetlights ended and the highway disappeared into fields. I worked the night shift alone, midnight to sunrise. Most nights passed quietly. Coffee brewing, refrigerators humming, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like tired insects. After 2 a.m., customers stopped coming. The world outside felt paused. Glass doors reflected the empty road, pale and endless beneath weak parking lot lights. Wind moved dust across the concrete, but no cars arrived. That was when the lights began failing. One by one, the farthest parking lamp flickered, then went dark. A few minutes later, another dimmed and died. The darkness crept closer to the building slowly, patiently. I checked the monitor screens behind the counter. All cameras worked. Empty pumps. Empty road. Nothing moving. Then the automatic door slid open. Cold air entered. No one stood there. I waited, expecting someone to walk inside late, maybe distracted. The doors closed again. Silence returned. I told myself it was faulty sensors. Old building. Old wiring. Still, unease settled quietly into my skin. I walked down the snack aisle to restock shelves. Halfway down, I stopped. Someone stood at the far end. Tall, completely still, facing the refrigerator doors. Relief came first. Finally, a customer. Need help finding anything? I asked softly. No response. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer. The humming from the coolers felt louder here, vibrating faintly through the floor. That was when I noticed something wrong. The refrigerator glass reflected everything clearly. Shelves. Lights. My own shape approaching. But the tall figure cast no reflection. Only empty aisle behind where it stood. My steps slowed. The air felt colder near it. I swallowed and looked directly at the spot where the figure should have been reflected again. Nothing. When I lifted my eyes, the aisle was empty. The figure had vanished. I checked every row. No one. The entrance doors remained closed. Outside, another parking light shut off. Darkness now pressed right against the windows. I returned to the counter, uneasy. Minutes passed. Then the register beeped softly. A completed transaction appeared on the screen. Time stamped. 3:33 a.m. One item purchased. Black coffee. Paid in cash. But the drawer had never opened. No customer stood nearby. No cup missing from the machine. The receipt printed slowly on its own. Paper curling into my hand. I stared at it while the building hummed quietly around me. Outside, the last parking light flickered, then died. For a moment, the store felt surrounded by complete darkness, and in the glass entrance doors, I thought I saw a tall shadow standing just outside, waiting. Morning eventually arrived. Sunlight filled the lot. All lights turned back on, as if nothing had happened. The receipt remained in my pocket. I kept working nights for another month, but every shift after that, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the doors would open briefly, cold air would enter, and somewhere in the store, I felt watched by a customer who never needed help. The apartment was cheap because no one wanted the top floor, thin ceilings, old plumbing, too many strange noises at night. I didn't mind. I like quiet places. The first night, I heard footsteps above me, heavy ones, slow pacing from one end of the apartment to the other. I assumed someone had moved in upstairs. Old buildings carried sound easily, but the landlord told me the unit above mine was empty, renovations pending, no tenant. I laughed it off. Wood settles. Pipes shift. Buildings breathe. Still, every night after midnight, the footsteps returned, steady, measured, back and forth, never running, never stopping, just pacing. The sound felt too deliberate to ignore. I tapped the ceiling once with a broom handle. The footsteps stopped instantly. Silence filled the room. Then, slowly they resumed, directly above where I stood. I stopped tapping after that. Dust sometimes drifted down from the ceiling during the pacing, fine particles floating through lamplight like pale snow. One night, the dust fell in clear shapes, oval impressions, one after another, like footprints pressing downward from above. I stared at them forming on my floor, perfect spacing, walking across my living room, matching the steps overhead. My stomach tightened. The footsteps continued nightly, always after midnight, always ending around 3 a.m., then silence. One evening, exhaustion kept me awake later than usual. I lay in bed listening. The footsteps began. Slow, heavy, closer than before. They stopped directly above my head. The ceiling creaked softly. I held my breath. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the footsteps continued again, but no longer above me. They moved beneath the floor, below my bed, walking through the apartment below mine, except that unit was also empty. I sat upright, The sound traveled slowly beneath the floorboards, crossing the room with unmistakable weight. Dust rose slightly from the carpet as if pressure passed underneath. The pacing continued beneath me for several minutes, then faded. Silence returned. The building felt hollow afterward. I never complained again, never tapped the ceiling. Eventually, I moved out. But sometimes, late at night, when my current home settles into quiet, I hear faint pacing above me, and I wonder if the footsteps were never upstairs at all. Maybe they were only passing through. The bus stop stood alone beside an empty rural road. A single bench, one flickering lamp, nothing else for miles. I waited there just after midnight, the air cold enough to fob my breath. The schedule said the last bus arrived at 12:40 a.m. I checked my phone. 12:52. No headlights approached. The road stretched silent into darkness. Wind rustled dry grass nearby, whispering softly against the pavement. I considered walking home. Then I saw it, a bus emerging from the distance. No headlights, no destination sign, just a dark shape gliding toward me. It slowed as it reached the stop. Doors opened with a quiet sigh. Interior lights glowed faintly. Inside sat passengers, perfectly still, rows of figures facing forward. Their shapes looked human but lacked detail, silhouettes softened by dim lighting. No one moved. No one looked at me. The driver turned slowly. Where a face should have been, there was only shadow, smooth darkness beneath the cap. I hesitated. The air felt colder near the open doors. Something inside me warned not aboard. I stepped back. The driver remained motionless. After several seconds, the doors closed gently. The bus pulled away without sound. No engine roar, no vibration. It disappeared into darkness as silently as it arrived. I looked down at the road. No tire marks, no lingering heat from brakes, only empty pavement. The lamp above me flickered again. I waited another hour. No real bus came. I walked home alone. Since then, whenever I pass that stop late at night, I avoid looking down the road, because part of me fears the bus might return, and one night I might feel tempted to step inside. Hospitals never truly sleep. Machines hum endlessly. Lights remain dim but constant. Time feels suspended between night and morning. I stayed there for several weeks after surgery. Sleep came in fragments. Short dreams broken by beeping monitors and distant footsteps. The first night, I noticed a shadow in the corner. Tall, standing between the curtain and the wall. I assumed it belonged to equipment casting strange light. But when nurses entered, the shadow faded. When they left, it returned, always in the same corner. Still, watching, I grew used to it, almost comforted by its presence during long, sleepless hours. One evening, another patient down the hall mentioned the tall visitor. She spoke casually, like discussing a nurse. I asked what she meant. She only shrugged. Someone checks on us at night. The nurses denied entering rooms during those hours. Records showed no activity. Yet every night around 3 a.m., I felt the presence again. Never approaching, never threatening, only observing quietly. The machines hummed steadily while moonlight slipped across the floor. On my final night, discharge papers rested on the table beside me. Morning approached. I glanced toward the corner. The shadow stood there one last time. For a moment, I felt grateful. Less alone. Then a nurse entered to remove monitors. When she left, the corner remained empty. The shadow never returned. Sometimes I wonder if it had only been waiting for me to leave, or if it stayed behind, watching someone else who couldn't sleep. The playground sat 2 streets from my house. During the day, it was loud with children. At night, it felt abandoned. Orange streetlights bathed everything in dim, tired color. I walked past it one evening, unable to sleep. The air carried the faint smell of wet leaves. Swings hung motionless. Slides gleamed faintly under pale light. Then one swing began moving, slowly, back and forth. No wind touched my face. The chains creaked softly. I stopped walking. The movement continued, gentle, rhythmic, like someone invisible rocking calmly. A small shadow appeared beneath the swing, child-sized, perfectly shaped against the sand. but nothing occupied the seat. I listened carefully. Soft laughter drifted through the air, thin and distant, without echo. The swing slowed, then stopped. The shadow remained for a moment longer, before fading into stillness. I stepped closer. The sand showed footprints, small ones. They crossed halfway across the playground, then ended abruptly. No return steps, no direction away, just absence. I left quietly. Since then, whenever I pass playgrounds at night, I avoid looking at empty swings, because sometimes they don't look empty at all. Every apartment building has one place people avoid. In mine, it was a stairwell. Residents preferred the elevator even for one floor. Packages piled near doors rather than being carried upstairs. Conversations always stopped when someone mentioned using it at night. I didn't understand why. The stairwell looked normal during the day. Concrete walls, motion lights, metal railings cold to the touch. Quiet, too quiet. The first time I used it after midnight, the lights turned on before I pushed the door open. A soft click echoed from inside. I paused, hand still on the handle. Someone must already be there, I thought. I stepped inside. The stairwell smelled faintly damp, like rain trapped indoors. My footsteps echoed downward as I descended one level. That was when I saw him. A man-shaped shadow stood between floors on the landing below, perfectly still, facing upward toward me. I expected movement. A greeting, a shift, anything human. Nothing happened. The figure remained frozen, halfway between floors. I assumed he was waiting for someone. I walked down another step. The motion light above him flickered. For a brief second, darkness swallowed the landing. When the light returned, he looked closer. I stopped walking. Maybe I had misjudged distance. The stairwell made space confusing. I continued downward slowly. The figure didn't climb, didn't descend, just remained positioned between floors. Yet each step I took seemed to shorten the distance unnaturally. I reached the landing. No one stood there, only empty concrete walls. The air felt colder than before. I looked up. The stairwell stretched endlessly above me, lights glowing in a vertical line. And far above, the same shadow stood again between floors, watching. I left quickly. After that, I avoided the stairwell at night. But sometimes the elevator broke, and I had no choice. Each visit followed the same pattern. The lights turned on early. The figure appeared halfway between floors, never moving normally, never changing posture, only distance changed. Every night it seemed one step closer. Weeks passed. The figure gradually occupied lower landings, then higher ones, always positioned where I would eventually walk. One night, I realized something unsettling. Its posture never changed. Arms at sides, head slightly tilted. It wasn't approaching. I was. The building remained silent around me as the understanding settled in. The shadow didn't move through space. It waited, and I kept choosing paths that brought me nearer. The last time I used a stairwell, the motion lights failed entirely. Darkness filled the space. I hesitated at the doorway. Then a light flickered faintly from below, enough to reveal the landing just beneath me. The figure stood there, one step away. I felt no anger from it, no threat, only patient expectation. I stepped back immediately, closed the door. Since then, I take elevators only. But sometimes, when passing the stairwell entrance, the motion light activates by itself. And for a brief moment, I feel someone standing just on the other side, waiting for me to come closer again. It began as ordinary sleep paralysis. At least, that's what I told myself. I woke unable to move. Moonlight filled the room with pale silver glow. Curtains hung motionless. The air felt thick, pressing gently against my chest. My body refused to respond. I could breathe. I could see. But I couldn't move. Panic rose slowly. Then I noticed it sitting beside my bed. A shadow shaped like a person. Calm. Still. Hands resting loosely on its knees. Watching me. Unlike nightmares I'd heard about, there was no aggression. No weight crushing my chest. Only presence. Quiet observation. Its outline shifted slightly, like smoke held together by invisible boundaries. I tried to speak. My voice failed. The room hummed softly around us. Seconds stretched endlessly. Eventually, I forced my eyes shut. When I opened them again, I could move. The shadow was gone. I convinced myself it was a dream, but it returned the next night. And the next, always during paralysis, always seated beside me, sometimes closer, sometimes leaning forward slightly, never touching. Each episode lasted longer, at first seconds, then minutes. I became aware of breathing that matched mine perfectly. Sinking rhythm by rhythm, fear faded into strange familiarity. I stopped fighting. Instead, I observed it observing me. One night, the paralysis lasted so long that panic returned. I gathered all my strength, forced air through my throat. A whisper escaped. Hello. The word barely existed, but the moment it formed, the shadow reacted. Its head tilted, not sharply, gently, like recognition. Warmth spread across my chest where fear once lived. Then movement returned to my body instantly. The shadow vanished. After that night, the paralysis stopped completely. No more visits. No more waking frozen. Sometimes I wonder if speaking ended the experience, or if acknowledging it meant the visitor no longer needed to return. Still, every so often I wake suddenly at night, certain someone had been sitting beside me moments before, watching quietly, waiting for me to notice again. I went hiking too late. That's the simplest explanation. The trail wound through dense forest where fog settled early, clinging low between trees. By midnight, the path barely existed. My flashlight carved a narrow tunnel through drifting mist. Leaves rustled softly overhead, though no wind touched my skin. The deeper I walked, the quieter everything became. Even insects fell silent. Only my footsteps remained. Then I noticed another shadow moving beside mine. At first I assumed it belonged to uneven light, branches shifting, fog bending. But this shadow moved against the direction of the wind, against my motion, keeping pace perfectly. I stopped. The shadow stopped. I walked again. It followed. No footsteps accompanied it. No broken twigs. Only visual presence beside me. The path began looping strangely. Landmarks repeated. The same fallen tree. The same curve in the trail. Time stretched uncertainly. I checked my phone. No signal. Battery draining faster than expected. The shadow remained beside me, never touching, never falling behind. Fear grew slowly, replaced by existential confusion. Was I lost or being guided? Eventually, exhaustion forced me to sit on a rock. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in my hands. The shadow stood beside me, still, waiting. I remembered advice from somewhere. Don't acknowledge strange things in the woods. So I stopped looking at it, stopped tracking it with my eyes. I focused only on breathing, only on the ground ahead. After several minutes, I stood and walked forward without checking my side. The forest changed immediately. The path straightened. Fog thinned. Distant road noise returned faintly. When I finally looked around, the shadow was gone. I reached the trail exit shortly after. Since then, I avoid night hiking, because sometimes I feel the forest didn't trap me. Something simply walked with me until I chose not to notice anymore. I arrived at the motel just before 1 a.m. Rain fell lightly, tapping against neon signs buzzing overhead. The lobby looked almost empty. One tired clerk handed me a key card without much conversation. Room 214. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old carpet. My footsteps echoed softly as I reached the door. When I opened it, darkness waited inside. Not ordinary darkness. A heavy stillness, like the room had been occupied moments before I entered. The air felt cool, unsettled. I switched on the light. Everything looked normal. Bed made neatly. Curtains closed. Bathroom door slightly open. Still, the room felt watched. I unpacked slowly, avoided looking at mirrors. Something about reflections felt wrong. Later, while brushing my teeth, I noticed it. In the bathroom mirror, behind me, a faint silhouette stood near the bed. Tall, motionless. I turned immediately. Nothing there. When I looked back, the reflection showed only empty space. My pulse quickened. I called the front desk. asked casually if anyone else had access to my room. The clerk paused, then said quietly, "That room wasn't assigned tonight." Silence followed. I looked at the key card in my hand. Room number printed clearly. When I returned downstairs to clarify, the clerk looked confused. No record of my check-in existed. No payment logged. He handed me a different room key. I returned upstairs. Room 214 no longer appeared on the hallway numbering. The door between 212 and 216 was simply gone. My original key card disappeared sometime during the night. I never saw it again. Sometimes I wonder where that room exists now, and whether someone still checks in there unknowingly, opening a door that was never meant to be opened. The overnight train moved quietly through countryside wrapped in darkness. Most passengers slept. Cabin lights dimmed to soft amber glow. Outside, the window reflected the interior more clearly than the passing landscape. The seat across from me remained reserved. A small paper tag displayed a name identical to mine. I assumed it was coincidence. The conductor never questioned it. I watched my reflection drift across the glass while distant lights slid past outside. After midnight, I noticed another reflection beside mine. A tall shadow seated across from me. Still, perfect posture. I looked directly at the seat. Empty. Back to the window. The reflection remained. The train announcements crackled overhead. A calm voice called a passenger name. My name, but no one stood. The shadow reflection slowly rose. In the glass, it walked toward the exit door. I followed its movement with my eyes. When I turned toward the aisle, no one walked there. The train slowed unexpectedly, stopped at a small platform surrounded by darkness. No station sign, no lights. The door opened briefly. Cold air entered, then closed again. The train resumed motion. Later, I checked the route map. No stop existed at that location. No scheduled pause. The reserved seat across from me remained empty for the rest of the journey. But sometimes during late train rides, I watch window reflections carefully, because occasionally I still see someone traveling beside me, leaving at stations that don't appear on any map. The house was older than anyone admitted. You could feel it in the walls, in the way the air stayed cool, even during summer, in how the floors held memories longer than footsteps. We moved in during late autumn. Leaves gathered along the porch railings, dry and brittle. The evenings arrived early. By 6, the windows already reflected darkness back at us. The basement sat beneath the kitchen, a narrow wooden door, paint peeling at the edges, a faint smell of damp concrete slipping through the frame. The first night, I noticed a light, a thin strip of pale yellow glowing under the door. I assumed someone had left it on. I opened the door, walked down halfway, and switched it off myself. The bulb hummed softly as it died. Simple mistake. But the next night, it was on again. Same time, just after midnight. My father blamed old wiring. My mother said the switch was loose. Old houses behave strangely, they said. Still, no one remembered turning it on. I began noticing more. Around 1:30 a.m., the house grew unusually quiet. Even the refrigerator hum faded. The air felt heavier, like breath waiting to be released. Then the light appeared. Every night, always after everyone slept. One evening I sat in the dark hallway, watching the door. The clock ticked behind me. 1:58, 1:59. At exactly 2, the light slid beneath the door again. Not flickering, not sudden, just present, as if it had always been on. I leaned closer. The wood felt cold against my hand. And then I saw it. Movement. A shadow passed slowly across the narrow strip of light. Not quick, not accidental. Someone pacing, back and forth. Softly, the shape blocked the glow in long, careful steps. I froze. No footsteps reached me. No creaking stairs. Only silence in that slow, shifting darkness. I told myself it was pipes, branches outside, anything ordinary. But shadows don't pace. The next morning, I checked the basement. Light off, nothing disturbed, dust untouched. The air smelled stale and still. For days, I avoided looking at the door at night. Yet I always knew when the light came on. The hallway changed. Colder, quieter, like the house itself was listening. One night, courage finally outweighed fear, or maybe exhaustion did. I woke at 1:55 a.m. and sat up. The hallway waited outside my room. Dim, silent. I walked toward the basement door before the light appeared. I wanted to catch it, to prove something logical existed beneath us. The clock reached 2. The glow slid under the door again, right on time. My heart beat slowly, heavy against my ribs. The shadow moved immediately. Long, tall, passing once, twice, pausing directly at the door, as if aware I stood there. The light darkened where feet should have been. I realized then something stood inches away from me on the other side, waiting. My hand trembled on the handle. The metal felt icy. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3, and opened the door. The basement stretched downward into darkness. The single bulb above the stairs hung still. Off. No light, no movement, only cold air rising past me. I stepped down carefully. Each stair groaned under my weight. The smell of damp earth wrapped around me. Halfway down, I turned to look back. The hallway upstairs was empty, quiet, normal. I reached the bottom. Concrete floor, old shelves, boxes stacked exactly as before. The light switch sat beside me, already flipped down. Off. My chest tightened, because behind me, a shadow stretched across the basement wall, longer than my body, standing upright. But nothing stood between me and the wall. I didn't move. The shadow shifted slowly. Its edges breathed, expanding, contracting, as if alive. I turned around. The basement remained empty, back to the wall. The shadow stayed, closer now, connected to nothing. My throat felt dry. I whispered without meaning to. Hello. The shadow tilted, just slightly. Recognition. That was a feeling. Not surprise. Not anger. Recognition. Like it had been waiting for me to finally open the door. The overhead bulb flickered suddenly and turned on. Bright yellow light filled the basement. The shadow vanished instantly. Only my own small shape remained against the wall. I ran upstairs and shut the door hard. Locked it, pressed furniture against it. The light never came on again. Not once. My family said the wiring must have fixed itself. They laughed when I told them the story. But sometimes at night, when the house is perfectly still, I wake knowing something changed. Because now, even with the basement dark, a faint shadow sometimes appears under my bedroom door, and it moves like it finally found another way upstairs. It was early spring when I went to the lake, the kind of night where winter hadn't fully left yet. Cold air rested against the skin. Breath drifted in pale clouds under the stars. I needed quiet. The lake sat far beyond town, hidden behind thin woods and gravel roads. No houses nearby, no streetlights, only water, still and endless. I arrived close to midnight. The sky stretched clear above me, heavy with stars. Their reflections covered the lake so perfectly that the surface looked like another sky lying beneath the earth. No wind moved. The water didn't ripple. Even insects seemed to avoid the place. I walked to the shoreline and sat on a flat stone. The cold seeped through my clothes. A faint smell of wet soil lingered in the air. For a long time, nothing happened. Just breathing. Just silence. Then I noticed something standing far out on the water. At first, I thought it was a trick of reflection, a darker patch among the stars. But it didn't move with the sky. It stood upright, human-shaped, tall, perfectly still. My eyes strained against the darkness. The figure stood several meters from shore, not floating, not sinking, standing, as though the lake were solid beneath it. I blinked. The stars shifted slightly with my movement. The figure did not. A tight feeling grew in my chest. I told myself it had to be a post, a tree, debris caught beneath the surface. Yet no ripple surrounded it. No disturbance touched the water. I stood slowly. Cold grass brushed my ankles. The figure remained facing me. Or at least it felt that way, because I could not see a face. Only absence. A silhouette made of deeper night. Then something changed. The reflection beneath it moved first. I noticed because the stars beneath the figure trembled. Small ripples formed around its mirrored shape, but the real figure above the water remained perfectly still. My breath slowed. I watched carefully. The reflection turned its head, a smooth, deliberate motion, but the figure itself had not moved yet. Seconds later, the real body followed, matching the movement the reflection had already made. My stomach tightened. The reflection was leading. The body was copying. I stepped backward instinctively. The grass crunched softly beneath my heel. The reflection shifted again, before the figure above did, watching me, anticipating me. Ripples spread outward without any visible cause. The lake remained otherwise untouched. I realized then it wasn't reacting to my movement. It was reacting to my attention. The moment I focused on it, the reflection stirred. When I looked away briefly, the ripples faded. I tested it. I stared down at the ground. Silence returned. The water still completely. Slowly, I raised my eyes again. The reflection moved immediately. Closer, just slightly. The real figure followed a moment later. My pulse pounded softly in my ears. The air felt heavier, colder, like standing near something vast and patient. I stopped breathing for a moment, and in that stillness, I understood something deeply wrong. The reflection wasn't beneath the figure. It was watching me first, then instructing the body how to behave. Like the water understood my presence before the world above it did. I stepped farther back from the shoreline. The figure advanced. One slow movement across the lake surface. No splash, no sound, only widening ripples spreading toward me. The stars broke apart where they touched its reflection. I felt suddenly exposed, as if the lake were an eye, and I had stepped directly into its gaze. My hands trembled. I turned away, walked toward my car, did not run. Running felt dangerous. Behind me, the lake stayed silent. No footsteps followed. No movement reached land. But I felt watched, not from behind, from below. I reached the car and opened the door quickly. Warm air greeted me. Safe, contained. Before driving away, I glanced once more toward the water. The figure was gone. The lake returned to perfect stillness. Stars rested undisturbed again. Only my reflection stood at the shore now. Small, alone, but for a brief second, my reflection lifted its head, a fraction earlier than I did. I drove home without looking back. Since that night, mirrors feel deeper. Water feels aware. And sometimes when I stand near still surfaces, I wait before moving, because I'm never certain anymore whether my reflection is about to move first. The visits had become regular, always late, always quiet. I never saw the figure directly, only at the edges of vision, a darker shape lingering where light faded. I convinced myself I needed proof, something real, something I could play back in daylight. So I bought a small camera, nothing special, just enough to record through the night. I placed it on a shelf facing my bed. The red recording light glowed softly, comforting, like someone else was awake with me. The first night, nothing happened. At least, nothing I remembered. Morning playback showed me sleeping peacefully. Still, silent. The second night felt different. I woke suddenly around 3 a.m. The room felt occupied. Air thicker, warmer near the bedside. I kept my eyes closed, listening, breathing carefully. Another breath existed nearby, slow, measured, not matching mine. I told myself to open my eyes, but fear held them shut. Eventually sleep returned. Morning came gently through pale curtains. I checked the recording immediately. The video showed me sleeping, exactly as before. No movement, no visitor, nothing unusual. But the audio contained breathing. 2 patterns, mine and another closer to the microphone. Calm, steady, listening. A cold weight settled in my stomach. The camera had heard what it could not see. The next night, I adjusted the angle, made sure every corner of the room stayed visible. I even left the lamp on to remove shadows. Around midnight, the air shifted again. That familiar awareness returned. I felt watched. My skin prickled. Without turning my head, I sensed something standing beside the bed, Just beyond sight, peripheral vision flickered. A tall shape leaned slightly forward. I forced myself to turn. Nothing there. Empty space. The feeling vanished instantly. Morning playback showed only me turning in bed, reaching toward empty air. But again, the audio recorded breathing beside me, closer this time, almost curious. On the third night, I stayed awake, pretended to sleep. The room hummed quietly. Minutes stretched long, then the temperature dropped suddenly. A faint pressure pressed against the mattress, like weight settling beside me. I froze. Peripheral vision caught movement, a shoulder-shaped darkness. Still, watching. I turned quickly. Gone. Always gone. Morning playback changed everything. The video showed an empty room. No shadow, no movement. But I was sitting upright in bed, facing someone, talking. My voice sounded soft and calm, almost familiar. I leaned closer to the speaker. My recorded voice whispered, "I know you're here." A pause. Then I nodded, listening, responding to silence. "I remember you too." The audio captured faint breathing answering me. Slow, patient. I felt dizzy watching it, because I had no memory of speaking, no memory of waking. The camera never recorded the visitor, only me interacting with something unseen. I stopped using the camera after that. But some nights when I wake suddenly, I feel watched again, and instinctively, I turn toward the empty space beside my bed. As if continuing a conversation, I no longer remember starting. The building was modern, glass walls, soft lighting, clean hallways that echoed slightly at night. I worked late often. Most evenings, I left well after midnight. The lobby always felt different then. Too quiet, like the building exhaled once everyone else went home. One night, I pressed the elevator button and waited alone. The doors opened immediately. Empty, bright, normal. I stepped inside and pressed the ground floor. The doors closed gently. The elevator began descending. Floor numbers glowed above the door. 12, 11, 10. The hum of motion vibrated softly through the floor. Then something strange happened. After passing floor 1, the elevator continued moving. Down. The display flickered. Instead of stopping at G, a new symbol appeared. I had never seen it before. The elevator slowed. Stopped. The doors opened. Darkness waited outside. Not complete darkness. Just dim enough that shapes blurred together. The hallway beyond looked unfinished. Concrete walls. Low ceiling lights flickering weakly. No signs. No decorations. No sound. I hesitated. The air felt colder, heavier, yet curiosity pulled me forward. I stepped out. The elevator remained open behind me. The hallway stretched longer than expected, and shapes stood along the walls. Several figures. Tall, still, human silhouettes made entirely of shadow. They faced forward. Not toward me, not toward anything. Just waiting. No movement, no breathing, no acknowledgement. I felt like I had entered somewhere not meant for living people. The lights dimmed further. Edges of the figures softened, blending into darkness. A quiet understanding settled over me. This wasn't a floor. It was a pause, a place between destinations. I backed slowly toward the elevator. None of the figures moved, yet I felt their awareness shift toward me. Without turning, without heads, just presence. The elevator doors began closing. I lunged forward, stepped inside as they nearly met. The doors sealed shut. The elevator rose immediately. No button pressed. No command given. Floor numbers climbed quickly. 1, 2, 3. My reflection stared back at me from the metal walls. Pale, unsteady. When the doors opened at the lobby, everything looked normal again. Warm lighting, soft music, security guard reading at his desk. I asked about floor 0. He frowned, said the building had no basement levels. Later, curiosity drove me to check building records. Architectural plans listed only floors 1 through 12. No 0, no sublevel, nothing beneath. Since that night, elevators feel different. Sometimes when descending late at night, the display flickers briefly. and for a moment, before correcting itself, I see the number 0 waiting again. I went camping alone to clear my thoughts. Deep forest, miles from the nearest road. Trees stood close together, branches weaving overhead like a ceiling of shadows. By evening, fog drifted between trunks. Soft, silent, the fire burned low as night settled. Crickets faded one by one. The forest grew unnaturally still. I crawled into my tent around midnight. The thin fabric glowed faintly under moonlight. Every movement outside pressed shapes against the walls. Leaves shifting, branches swaying. Normal sounds, at least at first. Sometime after falling asleep, I woke suddenly. No reason, just awareness. The air felt colder inside the tent. My breath visible. Then I noticed movement. A shadow passed across the fabric. Slow, measured, circling. Soft footsteps pressed grass flat outside. Careful steps. Patient. I held my breath. The figure stopped near my head. Its outline stretched tall against the tent wall. Human-shaped, but indistinct. No details. Just presence. I waited for it to unzip the entrance. To push through. It never did. Instead, it moved again. Circling. Always just outside reach. Hours passed like that. Footsteps tracing endless loops. Sometimes near my feet. Sometimes behind me. Never entering. The forest remained silent otherwise. No animals. No wind. Only that quiet pacing. Then I heard it. A whisper. Close to the fabric. My name. Spoken perfectly. Soft. Familiar. Not threatening. Just certain. I squeezed my eyes shut. Pretended sleep. The whisper came again. Gentle. Patient. Like calling someone home. I didn't answer. Eventually exhaustion pulled me under. Morning arrived slowly. Birds returned. Warm sunlight filtered through trees. The forest looked ordinary again. I stepped outside cautiously. No footprints marked the soil. No broken branches. Nothing disturbed. Only flattened grass surrounding the tent. A perfect human outline pressed into the earth. Lying beside where I had slept, as if someone had rested there all night. Facing me through the thin fabric. I packed quickly and left. But even now, when sleeping alone, I sometimes wake feeling someone lying just beyond reach, close enough to whisper my name again, waiting patiently for me to answer next time. The school looked smaller at night. I had returned to pick up something I'd forgotten, a notebook left behind before the weekend. The parking lot sat empty. Streetlights hummed faintly above cracked pavement. Inside, the building smelled of old paper and cleaning solution. Fluorescent lights flickered as I walked down the hallway. Each step echoed longer than it should have. Classrooms stood dark behind glass windows. Chairs stacked. Desks empty. Learning paused mid-breath. My classroom waited at the end of the corridor. Room 214. The door stood slightly open. I was certain I had closed it earlier. A pale light flickered inside. Not fully on. Not fully off. I pushed the door slowly. It creaked inward. Cold air slipped past me. The overhead lights blinked unevenly, casting long shadows across rows of desks. And someone sat inside. A figure occupied the last desk near the window. Back straight, facing the chalkboard. Perfectly still. I froze near the doorway. My mind searched for explanations. A teacher, a student, security. But no movement came from the figure. No breathing. No shifting posture. Just a silhouette darker than the dim room. I stepped inside carefully. The floor tiles felt louder beneath my shoes. The figure didn't react. The chalkboard ahead remained blank. Dust coated its surface. Then faint movement appeared. White lines forming slowly across the board. Letters emerging without a hand holding chalk. Each stroke appeared gradually. Carefully, as if written by someone invisible. My chest tightened. The figure at the desk remained motionless, watching the board. The writing continued. Slow, deliberate. You stayed too late. The final word completed itself with a soft scraping motion that never touched my ears. Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable. I looked toward the seated figure again. It hadn't turned, hadn't acknowledged me, yet I felt noticed, expected. The lights flickered harder. For a brief moment, darkness swallowed the room. When they returned, the desk was empty, chairs slightly pulled back. Still warm-looking somehow, I backed toward the door. The message remained on the chalkboard. Clear. Waiting. I left quickly, shutting off the lights behind me. But as the room darkened, I noticed something strange. Through the narrow window, in the door, the chalk writing slowly erased itself. Not wiped away. Just fading. Like it had never needed to exist once I read it. Since then, I avoid empty buildings after hours. Because sometimes, when rooms fall quiet enough, I feel like I'm the last student remaining. And something patient is waiting to tell me. Class has already ended. It started subtly. So subtle I almost ignored it. Late at night, while brushing my teeth, I noticed my reflection hesitated. Only for a second. I moved my hand. The reflection followed, slightly late. I blamed exhaustion. Too many sleepless nights. But the delay returned the next evening. I lifted my head. My reflection lifted a moment afterward. A faint unease settled beneath my ribs. The bathroom felt colder than the rest of the apartment. Light hummed overhead. The mirror reflected everything clearly, except timing. Each night, the delay grew longer. 2 seconds. 3. I tested it constantly, raising my arm, tilting my head, blinking slowly. The reflection always followed behind. Never ahead, never matching. One night, I turned quickly away from the mirror. My heart pounded. I waited, then turned back. For a brief moment, my reflection was still finishing the previous motion, catching up like a recording buffering into place. I stopped sleeping well after that. The mirror drew my attention every night. I felt watched from inside it, not by my reflection, by something standing just beside it. One evening, while washing my face, I saw it clearly. A tall shadow appeared next to my reflection, only inside the mirror, standing close. Its outline calm and patient. I spun around instantly. The bathroom stood empty behind me. No one there. When I faced a mirror again, the shadow remained beside my reflected body, unmoving, observing. My reflection looked forward calmly, but I felt fear rising in my real body. The delay increased again. 5 seconds now. I raised my hand, waited. The reflection lifted its hand slowly afterward, but the shadow beside it didn't move at all. It simply watched. I began covering the mirror before bed, a towel draped across the glass. Still, I felt awareness behind it, like someone waiting for the cover to be removed. One night, I forgot. Half asleep, I entered the bathroom. The mirror stood uncovered. My reflection faced me already, not copying, not delayed, just standing still. I froze, because I hadn't stopped moving yet. My reflection had. It watched me approach. Independent, silent. The shadow beside it leaned closer. I stepped backward slowly. The reflection did not follow. It remained where it was, breathing calmly, waiting. I turned off the light and left the room. Since then, I avoid mirrors at night. But sometimes, passing dark windows or reflective glass, I sense hesitation. Not mine. Something inside the reflection, deciding whether to move at all. The house across the street always had its lights on. Every night, without fail, curtains drawn tight, warm yellow glow spilling through thin gaps. At first, I barely noticed. Neighborhoods developed patterns. Someone working night shifts. Someone restless. But weeks passed. Then months. The lights never turned off. Around midnight, I often saw a silhouette behind the curtains, standing perfectly still, facing outward, watching the street, watching me. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe they stood near a window, like I sometimes did. Still, the figure never changed posture, never sat, never moved rooms, just stood there, every night. One evening during heavy rain, lightning illuminated the house clearly. For a split second, the silhouette appeared unnaturally tall, too thin, edges too sharp to belong to a person. The next morning, curiosity pushed me to ask neighbors about the house. They looked confused. One older man said no one had lived there for years. The property had been abandoned after the previous owner moved away. I laughed awkwardly, pointed toward the glowing windows. He shook his head slowly, said the electricity had been cut long ago. That night, I watched carefully. The light still burned. The silhouette still waited behind the curtain, unmoving, aware. I walked closer across the street. Grass overgrown around the yard. Mailbox rusted shut. Windows dusty from outside. Yet inside, warm light glowed softly. I stepped onto the porch. Cold air wrapped around me. The front door hung slightly open. Darkness waited beyond. No light, no furniture, no electricity. The house stood empty, completely abandoned. I backed away slowly. Across the street again, I looked up. My own house reflected faintly in the neighbor's window. And behind that reflection, the silhouette still stood, watching, exactly where it always had. Even now, years later, when I wake at night, I sometimes glance outside. The house is dark now, quiet, empty, but occasionally, a shape appears behind my own curtains instead, standing still, keeping the same watch it once kept across the street. I walked home late that night. The streets were empty. Cool air drifted through quiet neighborhoods. Only street lights guided the path. The first light flickered as I passed beneath it, then went out. I paused, looked back. Darkness swallowed the sidewalk behind me. I continued walking. The next light ahead buzzed softly. Its glow felt weaker somehow. As I stepped under it, it shut off too. One by one, each streetlight died as I approached. Never before, never after, only when I passed beneath them. The world behind me disappeared into shadow. Ahead remained faintly lit. Like darkness followed deliberately. My footsteps slowed. A strange calm replaced fear. The air felt thicker, quiet enough to hear my own breathing clearly. When I reached the final streetlight near my block, it hesitated. The bulb flickered violently, light stretching and shrinking, and then I noticed them. Multiple shadows spread across the pavement, but only one belonged to me. The others moved independently, sliding across asphalt, changing shape without bodies. Some taller, some smaller. They shifted gently around me, not threatening, just present, watching. I stopped walking. The shadows stopped too. Perfect stillness surrounded me. I realized something slowly. They reacted to fear. Every time my heartbeat raced, they moved closer. When I calmed myself, they settled. I breathed slowly, let tension fade. The darkness softened. The shadows drifted farther away, almost respectful. The final streetlight went out completely. Total darkness wrapped around me. And, strangely, peace followed. No fear, no urgency, only quiet acceptance. I walked the remaining distance home, guided by memory alone. The shadows moved with me, not chasing, not hiding, simply accompanying. When I reached my door, they faded into the night. Since then, darkness feels different, less empty, almost comforting, as if something learned I no longer needed light to feel safe. The experiences never truly stopped. They only changed. Over time, the shadows felt less like strangers, more familiar, like recurring dreams remembered only halfway. One night, I woke without reason. My room rested in complete darkness. No moonlight, no passing cars, just still air and steady breath. And presence, many presences. Shapes gathered quietly around my bed, tall silhouettes lining the walls. Near the window, near the door, closer than ever before. I didn't reach for the light. I already knew turning it on would change nothing. The room felt calm, not threatening, almost welcoming. Soft whispers drifted through the air, my name spoken gently, again and again, but mixed within the whispers were memories, moments only I knew, childhood laughter, forgotten fears, places I had stood alone years ago. They remembered everything, more clearly than I did. I realized then they had always been there, at the edge of rooms, in reflections, beside beds, across lakes and hallways and empty streets, watching quietly, waiting, not hunting, not haunting, witnessing, waiting for recognition. My breathing slowed. Fear faded completely. One shadow stepped closer. Its outline softened. Familiar somehow, like recognizing someone without recalling where you met. A whisper reached me clearly. "We know you." And deep inside, I understood. They learned my name long ago. I was the one who finally learned theirs. Not spoken aloud, not heard, just felt. A connection stretching through every strange moment I had survived. I sat up slowly. The shadows did not retreat. They gathered nearer, gentle, patient. The darkness felt warm, safe. I reached toward the bedside lamp, paused, then lowered my hand. For the first time, I chose not to turn on the light. The room settled into peaceful silence. The shadows remained, no longer hidden, no longer distant, just companions, standing watch. And as sleep returned, I realized something quietly irreversible. I was no longer afraid of the night, because the night finally knew me too.